Welcome to my weekly podcast, Inspiring Each Other. Tonight I'm here with Maria Gigliotti. She is a therapist and has just started a new business recently called Crossroads Consulting. It's a new adventure into the corporate world for her. We try to do this weekly, but obviously I'm off a little bit. We took about an 8-week hiatus for the holidays, so I bulked up with some Christmas cookies, and I'm looking forward to getting started again. Maria, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
For me, I love sharing other people's stories in hopes that we might be able to inspire someone else out there that needs a little help at a rough moment.
Sure.
My personal journey in my early 20s, it was challenging. I had trouble finding my way. I bounced through a couple different jobs before medical school. Tell me that part of your story.
Well, everything up to about the age of 21 was pretty typical. You know, small town USA, graduated from high school, went to college, graduated from college at 21, and then kind of got lost in the world. At the age of 25, I found myself sitting in jail for about 3 weeks, and probably the most self-reflective time I've ever had in my life. I didn't really know what was going to be next for me, but I knew that it was the first time ever that people really wanted to know what I was struggling with. I feel like up until that point, I had maintained the image. I did all the things. I checked all the boxes. I followed all the rules. Mishaps in teenage land, but nothing really significant. So then when I wind up in jail at 25, there's all of a sudden this moment of, wow, something's been going on for her this whole time that nobody ever knew.
Was that all self-reflection at that point? Was there a jail counselor or therapist, or did somebody along that road help you identify that, oh my gosh, wait a minute, something's not quite right here?
That was all self-reflective. You know, the irony at that point was that I had my bachelor's degree in social work. So I knew a lot of stuff. I had a lot of information and a lot of knowledge, but not as much application as I would then learn to have moving forward from that moment.
How'd you get out of that moment?
Oh, jeez. I did what people told me to do. I went to rehab. I did outpatient treatment, and I started what is an ongoing road of mental health work. Really dug into a lot of the things that were driving me at that point, which were a lot of painful experiences that I had had prior to that.
When where I sort of met you is through Nick, right? And coaching him a little bit, and in this journey, where does Nick come in? Your wonderful son and inspiration.
Yeah. He taught me probably the two greatest lessons in life, which have been unconditional love and giving yourself grace. In learning through the bumps and the hiccups that I didn't know what I was doing, and that was okay. You know, there was going to be people along the way to help me. And for sure, the best part of my journey thus far has been being a mom, for sure.
I feel the same way about my kids. There's so much that you, I don't know, pass on and hope to share with them, and you want to make the road a little easier for them than it was for you. Yes. But at the same point, we all need our bumps to grow through and become resilient. Talk about starting your first practice. So when I met you, Nick was a young guy, and you had just, I don't know, as a guy who's just started something new, had the courage to begin a whole new private therapy practice. Talk about that.
Yeah. So a couple years after Nicholas was born, my mom was diagnosed with melanoma. Unfortunately, she passed pretty quickly. It was about 4 months from diagnosis to her passing. So in the midst of all that, Nicholas gave me that opportunity to be in the moment, and he was 2. So it was really just about what he needed next. So that was my life for a couple of years, just trying to push through, navigate life without my mom. raise a toddler, those pieces of the puzzle. And when he was eight, about eight, I was finally in a position to venture out. I had worked in mental health my entire career. I was working in an outpatient clinic and I had been there for about 8 years, and it just felt like the right time. I felt so much more confident in my skill set. I was starting to get and had been getting really positive feedback about the relationships I was building and my skill set. So I thought I would try it. I actually never knew if it would work. I never knew for sure it would be a full time practice. I thought, oh, I'll do a little bit of this on the side. And it just grew, and it grew quickly. Um, I sent out like one letter back in like 2011 and said, "Hey, I'm trying this." Sent it out to private practice or primary care docs, all those typical referral sources, and it just grew. I never had to advertise again. I never had to send out any more letters. It just grew.
It's for me, I've had a lot of training over the years in how to be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
As I've just started something new, the business piece of it, paying the bills and having a little bit of money to stretch it out for a little bit, and the marketing and advertising. And did that stuff freak you out at all? Because that's the stuff that, I lost sleep over in the first several months.
For sure. I was terrible at it. What I was good at was being a therapist. I was not great at all the financial management. You're dealing with insurance companies, which it should be its own degree in practice management. So I had a lot of that going on. But I also really, really, really desired the flexibility. There's downsides to being self-employed. You don't work, you don't get paid. You don't get vacation time, but I really wanted that flexibility for that time in Nicholas's life, because at that point he's in middle school.
Yeah.
And now we're playing sports and we have friends, and I really desired that.
I want to be a good mom.
Yes.
It's kind of, and whatever other fears you had about getting going on your own, they just kind of disappear because I just want to be a mom.
Just kept focusing on that. And I don't even think I knew what you're saying about being in business. I don't even think I knew half of that. It's just been a learning curve.
I love it. There's a divorce that comes in there, right? And separation. And as a guy that's just gone through some of that stuff, it is emotional turmoil, right? It's hard.
It's hard.
And I found my new beginning helped me, right? Try to get something to focus on. What was your experience as you're going through that stuff, and Nicholas as a young guy?
Well, I think, again, doing my absolute best to be in the moment. There's probably nothing I enjoyed more in Nicholas's growing up than his sports life. The amount of parents that I became friends with really was a lifesaver for me. Kind of being in that world of single parenting, being a single mom for periods of time, it honestly never felt like that. I always felt like I had support. I always felt like he had support. I never felt alone in my parenting, even though it looked like that.
It's awesome. I think as I've gone through things, losing my parents and my recent stuff, the community has always been insanely supportive of everybody, right? And so our small town of Seneca Falls is just a supportive community 9.5 times out of 10.
Yes.
And it's nice to hear that you kind of had that same experience as you were going through things. When we were talking earlier, my kids are moving towards where Nicholas is now, right? And you talked a little bit about this sort of empty nest experience that you get when you put all of your effort into, and then it's just like, see ya.
Yep.
Tell me about that. How was that experience for you?
That was a more challenging than I had anticipated. Gratefully so. I was always so excited for what he was doing. It took the edge off of that sadness or that emptiness. I really feel like I was ill prepared. I don't think that I knew to do more self-care or create more community prior to him leaving. somehow I pushed through it. Definitely struggled with some depression in that initial semester that he was gone. You know, the balancing act of, well, I want to talk to him all the time, but I can't call him all the time. So some of those things that you just have to figure out, you know, and have some really honest conversations and be able to say, listen, I miss you, but I also don't want to bother you. I want you to live your life, and just be able to talk that through.
It's such a fine line, right? And I feel
Yes.
like, my parents were a little bit older, and I was the last of four. And so when I finally got to that point, I feel like my parents were, get out of here. I don't want to see you again. We
Sure.
we we want to we want to go on and do all our empty nest things.
Yes.
Um, and I'm not quite in that empty nest phase, but going through what I'm going through, you feel a little bit of that. You're not there for your kids every day. You don't see them every day.
Mhm.
And it's hard. And I had a lot of those same feelings. You
Mhm.
want to call and check in and reach out, but then at the same point, you want to be like, okay, you got this. You're a big kid.
Yep, you're
Kind of
ready.
call me if you need me.
Mhm.
But it's so complicated.
When it becomes really a challenge in the sense that, you know, working with people, when you're going through your own stuff, it really takes you to task to make sure your self-care is on point,
Yeah.
because you wanna be your best self in those relationships.
And it's hard at times,
It's
right?
hard.
And I don't know. I'm not a therapist, but this is what I do for a living.
Yes.
Is try to help people through things, and it is still sometimes really, really hard to grab a hold of your own stuff
Absolutely.
as you're trying to hold it together and be the best version of you for your patients.
Absolutely.
um, I, I think personally there's some points where maybe I wasn't the perfect dad or husband in this moment or that moment because of the burden of what we do every day trying to help people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do you move into this new thing, right? So now we're corporate Maria.
No idea.
Where does that come from?
Every so often, I just get these ideas, and somehow I end up down these roads. A couple years ago, I really felt like I was getting burned out. For sure, started it during COVID. I was When life was virtual, nobody ever missed appointments, nobody ever canceled appointments, nobody ever rescheduled appointments, and you count on that, really, that downtime or that flexibility. So there was none of that, and it was exhausting. So over, you know, those couple of years, and then Nicholas leaves for college. I turned 50, you know, so really just looking at these life changes and feeling like I want to do something bigger. I wanted to be able to take the good that I do and do it elsewhere. I have been a consultant at a nursing home for about 13 years at
Hmm.
this point. So I did have my toe in the water about what that dynamic is, about what that role is. And I really enjoy that. So I figured I could grow it from there. So honestly got on the internet and started looking up different types of consulting to do, primarily as a social worker. And I fell into business consulting, which is phenomenal, covering content such as leadership development, strategic planning, emotional intelligence, culture. So, all of the components that are really, really, really important to a business. But I've brought my own spin to it because my strength is relating to people.
Mm-hmm.
So, if corporations and companies bring me in, that's how I'm going to hit the ground running. I'm going to be able to talk to people and engage with people and establish trust with people so we can get to the bottom of some of the hiccups that I think too many companies face when there's this divide between management and staff.
It's so complicated, and leadership is so complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Somehow I not only became a doctor, but I became a leader, right? And as a doctor, you get a ton of training about everything to the littlest minutiaest thing. And then all of a sudden you're a doctor. So obviously you know how to lead this room of people.
Sure.
It's no issue for you at all. Just lead them.
Right.
And you get zero training.
Yes.
Um, Talk a little bit maybe about some of that
Mhm.
and the emotional intelligence, because I think I'm pretty compassionate and intelligent, but that was really hard as a leader.
Yes.
And it took me years to kind of figure that role out. What's your experience been
Sure.
there?
So a handful of the content was created specifically for that premise that if you're good at your job and you get promoted, you're not necessarily ready for the promotional skill set. So you might be, in that kind of entry level, earlier on skill set, and then you're all of a sudden a manager or a supervisor. Well, you might know the skill set for what the job you were doing, but if you don't have the people skills, it's a setup for failure, which then of course everybody feels terrible about. So a lot of the content was created to gear toward that population. The beauty of the leadership development work that I do is that a component of it is business related and the other component of it is self-leadership. So it's people understanding their mental development, their social development, really hard self-reflective questions so people can learn what makes them tick. There used to be this, I think people used to believe it, that there was this line between home and work. If COVID taught us nothing else, it taught us that there isn't one.
Yeah.
So let's make our people the best people they can be. So when they're home or they're at work, they're showing up with integrity and they're showing up with clarity and they're showing up with a level of investment and commitment and helping them learn that about themselves.
The self-reflection piece gets really complicated. And when you're a leader, you're obviously I'm right all the time, right? Obviously, I never make a bad choice.
Right.
But there are moments when you bring your emotional baggage with you into that leadership role that we all do.
Of course.
And all of a sudden it becomes a complicated relationship. And it can lead to unpleasant interactions with people that you really care for and really want the best for.
Right.
Is that something that you found difficult to coach into old leaders rather than new leaders? How do you dabble in that in the corporate world?
Once they buy in, it's not so difficult, but those initial conversations can be somewhat like, I don't know why that's my job from the C-suite level
Yeah.
per se. I do this job, they do that job. So really just getting them to buy into the fluidity of, your employees are your greatest asset. So let's build them up.
And it's hard sometimes,
Yes.
right? It's hard sometimes.
Yes.
Go back to what I heard from you is that we burn out a little bit in the middle of this COVID stuff.
For sure.
And I've heard that from a lot of healthcare providers is we were overwhelmed and had to change in so many different ways. Doing therapy, was your client different? Did they bring more emotion to was there more depression? Talk a little bit about that.
There was certainly a lot more identified anxiety. The thing that I learned the most during COVID was that was honestly the first time in my career where I was sitting across from somebody experiencing the exact same thing as I was experiencing, right? Because we all have life experience, but it's not often happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
So I was sitting across from people, and the ability to relate was so, so deep, but you still have to maintain that professionalism. So they're utilizing you as support. So that was a real challenge. That was a real challenge.
The technology, I think, in my world, you know, it's a touch, right? So when you come to see me, I'm putting my stethoscope on your heart, and there's a metaphor there, right?
Yes.
And that touch piece, when people needed that touch the most, completely just disappeared
Yes.
for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and you could feel whether it was depression or anxiety or fear, whatever we want to call that emotion. I could feel it through the video when I was talking to people. Did you get a sense of that? And because I imagine you were all video too, right?
All virtual, yeah. And it was just for me. It caused me to really question what else I could do, or was there something else I could learn, or was there a different way to connect? Because I didn't love virtual therapy. I mean, some people I know love it. It's not my cup of tea. I really enjoy the interaction with somebody, sitting with someone. So that was outside my comfort zone to begin with. And then I did find myself almost checking in a little bit more with my clients to find out if they felt like they were getting their needs met, because I felt so foggy almost with it.
Y- in our medicine world, I don't know if you would call it a mistake, but it was mistakes. People would be a little short of breath, and when someone is short of breath, I need to listen to your lungs.
Yes.
And is this heart failure or COPD or COVID? And you really had to figure this out with a story. And after a few days, you'd be like, oh, I think I went down the wrong path. You just got to come in. You got to be one of these few people that I listen to and figure out. And during that time, it was emotionally challenging to figure out, when do I bring them in? When do we leave them home? How do we handle this as we move through COVID? It was hard.
And I think one of the additional stressors during COVID was I worked with a lot of teenagers. So primarily high schoolers, some middle schoolers as well, but often teenagers will come to my office by themselves, right? They use that time, they connect, we chat, those pieces of the puzzle. But when we're working virtually, they're home, which gave me a lot more information in a lot of situations, which was really valuable. But it also really instilled this sense of powerlessness.
The kids that I saw struggle the most were the kids that didn't have the support at home.
Yep.
Right? There wasn't a safe, nurturing environment, and their safe, nurturing environment was school.
Yes.
And therapy. And it was hard for them to get out. And for me, when you would see on a video appointment the chaotic nature of the world that this 16, 17, 18-year-old is going through, you can't help but go, well, of course this is why you feel the way you feel.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because I felt it, and I was just watching it on the TV. Do you think they were more clear? Do you think they sensed it, that you got a better idea of what was going on when you were seeing that?
Yeah. And we would talk about it when they did return to the office a little bit. And I think most of them, some of them might have been a little embarrassed, but I think most of them were really grateful that I could see it without them having to tell me.
And without judgment.
Yeah.
Right? So when we're doing what we do, you kind of don't judge. We all have these bumps along our journey.
For sure.
And how do we help you through that is really all we're trying to do.
And people know if you're an empathetic, non-judgmental person, especially kids.
They get a sense,
They
don't
know.
they? They get a sense.
They know.
Nicholas is gone.
Gone.
Growed up, employed.
Employed in
And
his field.
I love it. Is that any different than the college journey with Nicholas?
In that he's further away. More excited for him. I'm more excited for him all the time. I think because he was gone, this didn't hurt as much or wasn't as heavy. I think had he been home for a period of time, either during college or after college, that letting go might have been a little more difficult. Gratefully, my dad moved him to Florida because I don't know that I could have left him there and flown back. But, he's doing great, and just figure it out as you go, right?
I think so. COVID, he was kind of prime time COVID as a 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, right?
He was
in
a sophomore. Junior?
How did his friend group and the team around him, how did they evolve through that as you were sort of a witness, right? As a mom/therapist?
Sure. Video games.
Yeah.
They were always on those video games together. That was probably one of the times that I really saw the strength in his friend group, right? Maybe they were discouraged, maybe they were frustrated, maybe they were down, but they didn't stay there. And they really were so good to one another, even when things happened or games got canceled or all the things that happened during COVID. It was hard to watch because there was nothing you could do about it. And your kids' lives were turned upside down. But he has a solid friend group. So that was the key for him because, he wanted to hang out with his mom all the time.
Yeah. So. I love it. What about you from a mentor perspective? You know, as you were coming through this, was there one person that you went, oh my gosh, this woman, this guy is great, and I want to, kind of do this like this guy? How do you grow to where you are now?
With the consulting
Well,
or
either one of the steps, right? You turned into a therapist and then you turned into a consultant.
Mhm.
Was there a mentor person along the way?
When I was in undergrad, they encouraged us to consider times in our lives where we were influenced by a social worker in a way to kind of tap into where that influence may have come from that drove us to school to begin with. So for me, it was my grandfather had Alzheimer's. He passed when I was 11. So, probably around the age of 8 or 9, when he went to the VA in Canandaigua, I met a social worker there um, who was just so kind and so compassionate. And I mean, I was a lot. I was 8, 9. I was a lot. I had a lot of energy. I had a lot of questions. And she just sat with me. And I just remember how calming that felt. So, that I think was probably the beginning of my investment in that. And then, going through your own journey, you meet other people in the field that you really admire. I had a coworker when my mom was sick, and she just made me walk every day with her on my lunch. Every day, every day, every day for 4 months. Just because you're in the trenches
Yeah,
and my mom was dying,
yeah.
right? So get out, go take care of yourself, make sure that's a priority.
Do you feel your patients don't get that? So some of this self care, I think, is something that so many people that I talk to
Mhm.
don't quite grasp. Is that
Yes.
your experience as well?
Yes. I do think it's getting to be a little more mainstream
Mhm.
in terms of fitness or exercise or meditation, journaling, some of the self-care
Mhm.
stuff that I talk with clients about. But in the business, I really wish the self-care component would be driven home in undergrad, let alone graduate school.
We in our world we talk about that a little bit. I don't think I had a single class on nutrition.
Right.
It might have been one little pamphlet that they gave you. You have textbooks like this about some science stuff, and
Mhm.
and what we eat is this teeny tiny little pamphlet, and
Right.
it's a big part of self care.
Absolutely.
And you kind of learn that on the fly. It's interesting to hear you talk about this wonderful social worker when you're a young girl,
Mhm.
and then your first corporate adventure is Alzheimer's and
Mhm.
teaching people. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that's a job that I happen to again fall into. It's always so random. And I initially was there to support residents that had some mental health history or maybe going through some transitional issues, things like that. It developed into that in addition to some staff development work, which was the launch pad for the corporate consulting, really.
Love it.
So the administrator at the time that asked me to do the staff development, he went on to become a vice president of long-term care somewhere else. So last January, he had reached out and they had gotten a grant to create content for dementia education and to train and staff develop all of their long-term care staff amongst their 5 long-term care facilities. So I'm doing that. So that's been, really enriching. I don't know if it's just my individual aging process, but my love for the elderly just keeps growing. Um, so I'm loving every minute of that and helping staff to better work with folks with dementia. Still at the nursing home. It's this weird pocket in that they're still doing so much COVID stuff. It feels weird to me. I feel sad for the residents that we're still doing isolation and quarantine and things like that. That was the hardest part in the nursing home during COVID. Families can't come in, people can't go out. It was pretty devastating. Um, but I do love that population, and I feel really grateful for the grants opportunity too.
What is
So,
your experience? So when you're teaching the people that interact with someone with dementia, they range from all different types of educational backgrounds.
Hmm.
How do you communicate the message from one educational level to the next educational level? Does it change? Is it the same message?
Hmm. Well, the it's a 3-tier education process. It was created with myself and an educator within the healthcare system, and the first tier is for everybody, and that's the basic skill set. If you're dealing with a resident with dementia with hearing difficulties, here are some tips and tricks. We utilize a lot of information from a woman named Teepa Snow, who
Yeah,
is a
yeah,
dementia guru. She's
yeah.
fabulous. So that tier is for all people, all staff, anybody working with those residents. The second tier is primarily the clinical team,
Mhm.
the clinical leads. And then the third tier is going to be multidisciplinary. So that will be looking at things like behavior mapping, so watching what's triggering residents, and then care planning accordingly. So we can use some new skills and not do the old stuff.
It that's awesome, right?
Because
And
it's different in that historically, when you worked with persons with dementia, if they called you by the wrong name, historically they told you to correct them. That's not accurate anymore. If a resident walks in and calls me Susie, then I'm Susie.
um, that's awesome,
Yeah,
right?
it's
It's
so
it's
good.
a complete change.
It's so good.
Um, for me, in my experience with those residents, is sort of the physician. There was health issues when they called me, right? And then there was behavior issues,
Mhm.
right? And how do you, what are some of the new tricks to adjust behavior
Mhm.
separate from here? Let me just give you a pile of drugs so that you don't punch the nurse in the face
Agreed.
on this shift.
Agreed.
It sounds like it's a multidisciplinary approach that you're trying to figure out.
Yeah, so the third tier, which is the behavior mapping and the care planning, it's actually based on a program that was partially created out of Cornell. So it's evidence based treatment geared at resident to resident aggression. The behavior mapping component is looking at a resident's behavior 24 hours a day for a 2-week period, to see what the triggers might be, um, what was going on around them, what other staff were around, what other residents around, really documenting all of the pieces of any precipitating event to resident aggression. Behavior mapping is also being used for those residents that are um, have their own behavior struggles that aren't resident to resident. So they take a 2-week snapshot and look and see what residents are dealing with, and then from there, create a care plan that works. So, for example, there is a gentleman on one of the units in the healthcare facility that was a janitor. And so, at the times of day that he struggles, they give him a broom and he sweeps the unit. Not rocket science,
No, no.
but no more behaviors.
It in my day it was always, could you help me and fold some towels?
Yes. Yes.
I it when you ask somebody for help,
Mhm.
I feel like they are so much more likely to respond to you than when you say, "Hey, do this."
Yes.
Um, has that been your experience as you're plugging through this stuff?
Absolutely, because there's so much loss associated with not only the diseases of dementia, but you're in a nursing home. Like you've lost so much, including sometimes your purpose. You're talking about the baby boomer generation, which this was the generation that worked at the same job for like 40 years,
Yeah.
right? So you're really tapping into what you know about what was important to them.
So hard to figure out personally,
Mhm.
even harder to figure out for someone else when that other person can't quite tell you.
Mhm.
Right now you have to use other people in the system, whether it's, family, friends, to sort through it.
Takes some
Um,
work
it does.
and some time.
Are you loving it?
I do love it.
I love it.
I do love it.
Couple different things. What's your hours, right? How are you doing? Like,
I don't really know.
yeah.
I actually am getting ready to start a leadership development process um, this week, actually. So I'll be doing that. So that's most of the leadership development is weekly. This particular organization opted to do it bi-weekly because it involves homework.
Mm.
So they wanted to give some space to do that. So those processes are about 2 hours each. So if you're doing them every week, every other week.
Yeah.
I do have another consulting thing that I do with a small company in Penn Yan, which has gone through a tremendous amount of change. So I'm with them once a week, 5, 6 hours, depending. Um, really bringing in that, first of all, the human nature component of change,
Mhm.
and we don't like it. So let's just talk about that.
Yeah.
And then helping people reestablish some trust and some boundaries and those pieces of the puzzle. So I have that, and I still have a private practice,
Yeah.
and
You've
I'm
got a lot going
still
on.
at the nursing home, and I'm still teaching dementia education. So yeah,
You're busy.
it's so good though.
Do you
So good.
love most of what you do?
I do. I do. I love everything I do. The question always comes in making sure I have it to give to all of those components, because I don't ever want my integrity to come into question.
For for me, I have a process that I've come to call sort of building Superman, right? And so I get up each morning and I read and I pray and I might journal and then I exercise. And that's the first hour or so of my day where I am trying to prepare myself to be the best version of me to move through my day.
Yeah.
And inevitably, a lot of nights I find this chicken little version of myself where the sky is falling and what did I screw up with this patient and what's going on with this practice and how am I, what's your process? Tell me about your superwoman and chicken little moments. Do you have them? How do
Sure.
you balance them?
Sure. Overthinking is definitely an ongoing challenge in my world. For me, exercise really has been my staple. Whether that's burning anxiety or whether that's just being able to very intentionally say, this is 1 hour where Maria is dedicating it to Maria. Please don't talk to me. I'm not responding to text messages, just very intentionally setting up some boundaries in doing that. I also get up very early. I am a very early morning person. Um, I very much like to hang out with my dogs to start my day. So sometimes I'll exercise in the morning, but it's more often something I do in the evening to burn off that excess stuff. I'm currently training for a High Rocks challenge with Nicholas and his girlfriend.
I love it.
Again, one of those things. I'm like, sure, I'll do that. I had no idea what I was saying yes to, but it gives me something to do.
I think it's good to have those goals, right? It's
Yeah.
good to have that. I'm going to do this with my kid
Mm-hmm.
and his girlfriend. I think the family bonds that we build through different activities are the ones that have always been the most important to me as I grew up, and I'm trying to share those with my family.
Yeah.
It's not always easy as they grow up, but you have to
Mhm.
kind of find your way.
Mhm.
Um, the chicken little stuff for me, the process that I struggle with is my nighttime process, right? You're exhausted, and how do you turn it off when I don't have the energy to go for a walk? And if I go for a walk or a run or do any exercise, now I can't fall asleep afterwards, right?
Right,
Because I'm
right,
all
right.
amped up from the exercise. That's been a piece that's been really complicated for me to try to
Mhm.
sort out at the end of an evening.
Absolutely. I've become a pretty big fan of tapping.
Tell me about tapping. What
So,
is tapping?
tapping is a process that you literally tapping, and the process is done in certain meridians that kind of break the thought pattern.
Hmm.
So you start tapping with what you're saying to yourself is what you're actually saying to yourself. The next round of tapping is something in between. So, say for example, I'm really struggling with, I'm really stressed out about what I said to Jane Doe today. So that's what I start with. I'm having a hard time letting go. I'm being really hard on myself. I'm feeling self-critical. The second round, I'll say, I'm hoping to get better with this. I think I can be a little less self critical. I think I'll feel better when I'm less self critical. And so you keep taking it down a notch. You do about 4 or 5 rounds. Um, it's a trauma coping skill.
I love it.
Yeah, it's a form of trauma treatment. I don't utilize it in my practice, but I do use it for myself.
And it
Yes.
kind of brings you down.
Yeah, it actually, because of the spaces, again, the science you would understand, but because of the places that you're tapping, it's interrupting whatever that thinking pattern is.
sort of a fidget spinner, if you
Yes.
will, but slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me, and the complicated piece might be it's a glass of wine and a Jim Gaffigan on YouTube, right? To try to just check out, and sometimes the world still creeps back
It
in, right?
does.
And then ultimately you just fall asleep. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, tomorrow's a new day,
Right.
and you get up and start again.
It's a good time to give yourself grace too.
Yeah, yeah,
Be like, yep,
um,
I have that brain. I care about people a lot. So it is hard for me to turn it off.
yeah. It's it's been a growing process, right? I think when I started, um, I'm a really simple goal guy, and it might have just been I want to help as many people as I can
Mm-hmm.
because God, I love helping people.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And somewhere along the line, it became I want to help as many people as I can without losing my mind because there is a big burden to trying to care and help everybody get in a little bit better place.
Yes.
Did you have that same experience as you went through this?
For sure. I mean, when I first went into practice and my practice got busy, I was working probably 3 late nights a week.
Mm,
The nights that Nicholas wasn't playing sports, I was working.
mm,
Um, Thankfully, I don't have to do that anymore, but probably a majority, definitely around COVID, I probably could have worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And had COVID happened when I was younger, I probably would have. But because at that point I'm in my 40s, I'm already tired.
yeah.
Right? Like, I'm already too tired to do that.
Well, and you're trying to balance Nick, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to be there for him, and it's after you have kids, it's a little easier to set up boundaries so that you can help them as well.
Absolutely.
Um, what other bumps along your path? What else do you want to share?
Bumps. I mean, I'm always still working on things, right? I find more recently this evolutionary process. It feels very lonely at times. Um, I mean, I see a lot of clients, and so I know there are people out there doing the work, but those people aren't always in my circle. So sometimes my ability to connect with people is a bit of a struggle because I'm an overthinker or because I like a lot of deep conversation.
Mhm.
Um, so it can be a little lonely on the evolutionary path, I think. I just going to keep plugging along.
Yeah.
But it's a learning curve for sure. My self-care, it just has to stay strong. Um, I'm a huge, huge, huge advocate for just keep talking about it, right? Like just keep talking about mental health, right? It has to be normalized.
And it isn't,
Mm-mm.
and there's so many shows and conversations that were different when I grew up, but shows like Ted Lasso. Have you seen Ted
Yes.
Lasso? And
Yes.
then there's the new one with Harrison Ford. Is that Shrinking? Have
Yes.
you seen that one?
I have not yet.
They're just, it is all about emotional self care and talking to someone and being okay with it.
Mhm.
And some people are still really uncomfortable with that journey.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even like within my family system, I'm really the only one that went off the beaten path. I had an older brother who, by all intents and purposes, was pretty much perfect.
Hmm.
Um, so I had created this image in my head that I needed to be him. I was never going to be him. I love my brother dearly. We are just completely opposite humans. We're great as adults, and he married someone like me, which is just funny. But it just really embracing to be who you are and silence the critic, mostly the inner critic. Because when you take care of yourself and you prioritize yourself, people don't always love that.
Yeah,
It's a hard one.
it's really hard.
That is a hard one.
And I think as we evolve, there's different people that you might want to spend time with.
Yes.
And the same person that you were spending time with for a gazillion years, it might be different.
Yes.
You might not enjoy that and need to evolve into something else.
Mhm.
Um, and how do you politely tell whoever that is that, look, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but this isn't where I want to be today.
Right. Different places.
So hard and so complicated. And
Mhm.
um, personally, I love the word evolve, right? Because
Mhm.
what we know is we're all going to change.
Yes.
Every one of us is going to change, and you have to figure out how to drift into that new whatever new is going to be for you.
For sure.
Um,
You know, when I was living in this community, my son was going to school in this community. I mean, my whole life was here, right? So it was very much an issue of learning to get comfortable in my own skin, right? Because I'd like to believe that wherever I go, I'm pretty much the same person. So if you see me out having dinner, I'm very much the same person as you would see in the office. And it was work for me to do that. It was really, really, really important to me to be that person.
it, for me, it's that part has never really felt like work,
Mhm.
right? Being around people and chatting with people, it doesn't feel like work. The thing that felt like work is if someone asked me a complicated question about mom or dad's health when I have just shut down and unwinded with the
Yes.
family. You're like, wait a minute, let me try to turn myself back on because
Mhm.
I'm not. I'm just trying to watch this game. And you have to switch mindsets. And I understand why people ask,
Of
right?
course.
I get that need.
Mhm.
It's just complicated at
It
times.
is. And people trust you.
Yeah.
That's why they talk with you.
One of the things that my therapist said to me as I was struggling with my direction and where I was going to go, and I said, haven't you done enough? You've been in this community for how long, doing what for how long?
Mhm.
When is it enough? When can you say no and set a boundary um, and do what you want to do for you?
Yes.
And I never would have thought about it that way.
It's a great question.
But yeah, he's great.
It's a great
He's a great guy.
question. Yeah, we're definitely harder on ourselves than anybody else could ever be.
And I think nobody really cares. We care more about ourselves than anybody else does, and
Right.
I think that part's hard.
It is
Um,
definitely an ongoing self reflection.
Closing thoughts, is there any piece of wisdom you want to pass on to the world as you've gone through your stuff and um,
It's just so interesting because you don't always know that they're defining moments when they're happening, but they're such defining moments. Um, Definitely giving yourself a lot of grace, recognizing that every piece of the journey serves a purpose. I would not be who I was had I not gone through what I went through in my 20s. I just know that. Um, and try to take the shame out of the game,
yeah, I
right?
love that.
There's no shame in the game.
There is have you ever heard of Edith Eger?
No.
So she wrote a book called The Gift.
Mm,
um, and she is a woman that survived the Holocaust in horrific ways and came out on the other side and then became a therapist in her 50s. Um, and she's writing this book in her 90s.
well,
And she said the Holocaust was a gift. She had the ability to say that I would have never been able to live the last 20 or 30 years of my life helping all the people that I helped
yeah,
without the pain that I had through that awful time in my life. And that's something that is really hit home with me. And it sounds like it's the same concept with you, right?
for sure.
You really grow through those challenging times, and um, it's wonderful.
And learning to be vulnerable. Like I had said in the beginning, I had always kind of followed suit the way I was supposed to, but I was hurting.
Yeah,
I was in a lot of emotional pain. I didn't know what to do with it. So I self destructed,
yeah,
which, lessons learned.
yeah.
But to really have some open communication, just have one person that you can talk to that doesn't judge. Just one.
And I find that really complicated for younger individuals, right? Because they feel so judged by so many people.
Of course.
And that therapist role that as parents we might be so self-conscious about saying, oh my God, my kid's in therapy, right? That's baggage from my parents' generation that
Yeah.
quite frankly is useless today.
Yes.
Therapy is such a wonderful thing to sort out where you're going and who you are.
Yes.
It's important.
Yeah. Love my teenagers.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart for
Thanks for
sharing
having
some
me.
of your journey. I hope that this was as fun for you as it was for me.
It's
And
fantastic.
we find some information that people can share and find useful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.